and a privilege to have such an incredible audience in attendance today. This occasion allows the Corps of Cadets to acknowledge and honor the actions and sacrifices made by the inductees and their families in the service of this great nation, as well as provides the future leaders of the Coast Guard a clear connection to our heroes of the past. It is now my distinct honor to kick off this afternoon's event by introducing the 41st Superintendent of the Coast Guard Academy, Rear Admiral Doan.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. What an absolute honor it is for me to be here today with all of you for this, the 12th annual Hall of Heroes induction ceremony, a ceremony that recognizes distinguished, brave, noble, semper paratus service of extraordinary Coast Guardsmen, graduates of this great institution, leaders of character. And this year, all of these Academy graduates that are heroes being hailed and being saluted by all of us are aviators. And how fitting it is as we continue as a proud and grateful service to celebrate our Coast Guard's aviation centennial. The Hall of Heroes tradition was established 12 years ago to honor Coast Guard Academy graduates who died in the line of duty or who performed heroic service in our Coast Guard. The great class of 1959 had a vision for this initiative many years ago. And the class of 2009, the link in the chain class of 59, decided to join together and create an endowment that provides funds for this event each and every year. How about joining me in a gesture of thanks to 59 and 09 for their service, for their leadership, and for their heartfelt generosity. So today we honor and recognize Captain William W. Peterson, class of 1978, who is here today with his wife Sue, and many friends and classmates and colleagues. Captain Frank A. Erickson, class of 1931, who is represented today by Captain Joe Kimball from headquarters, Coast Guard Aviation Forces. It's good to have you here. Rear Admiral Chester A. Richmond, class of 1941, who is represented here today by his son Robert Richmond. And Captain Donald B. McDermott, class of 1929, who is represented today by his son Hugh McDermott and daughter Liz Tiernan. Welcome. Welcome to all of you. It is a great honor having you here to join this Coast Guard Academy community to be with your Coast Guard family. Early this morning, at 04:45 to be exact, while sipping on my first cup of coffee, I reviewed some read-ahead materials that were provided to me for today's event. And of course, included in the material were the citations of each of today's awardees. Citations that detail just why each are being recognized today goes without saying. Some pretty impressive, pretty amazing stuff. The citations which will be shared with you momentarily are downright inspiration. Listen to the words that capture and communicate actions of courage, aeronautical prowess, sound and effective judgment, knowledge, pioneering feats, dauntless valor. Actions that took place in hazardous conditions with selfless performance, in some cases, while disregarding one's own safety for the good of the mission, for serving and saving others. Within these citations, clearly on display and in full view for all of us are actions that underscore and highlight our core values: honor and respect and devotion to duty. Like I said, pretty amazing and inspirational stuff. To the core, you may remember at the beginning of the academic year, back in August, at our convocation, I shared a quote with you, a Hopley Yeaton quote. Yeaton, the Coast Guard's first commissioned officer. The quote that's etched in the tomb, and the tombstone up adjacent to the Academy Chapel. No joys domestic, not the love of ease, could cool thy patriot zeal in war, in peace. And I also shared with you an interpretation of that quote, an interpretation by a couple of first-class cadets, what the quote meant to them. They said, and I again paraphrase, Hopley, serving the country he loved, knowing it would be a lifestyle that wouldn't necessarily make him rich, a lifestyle that certainly wouldn't be easy, but rather a lifestyle that would be tremendously fulfilling. He, Hopley Yeaton, is the example for all of us, intrinsically motivated to serve others with energy and enthusiasm, intrinsically driven with purpose always. And so as I reflect on the humanitarian actions of this year's 4 Hall of Hero inductees, as you each listen to the citations about to be read, I think you would agree with me that Yeaton's quote and the cadet interpretation is so very applicable, so very emblematic, and so very on the mark. These heroes truly did display patriot zeal. They loved and still love their country, so much so they were willing to risk their lives. I would say that they too were intrinsically motivated and driven to serve others. They too did so with great energy and enthusiasm and purpose. Peterson, Erickson, Richmond, MacDiarmid, they truly are leaders of character, patriots, heroes. It's time to honor them, praise them, and thank them. Go Coast Guard, go Heroes, and forever, go Bears.
At this time, we will now proceed with the presentation of the Wall of Gallantry plaques. Each inductee's award citation will be read, and they will be invited to address the Corps. First is Captain William W. Peterson. Captain William Peterson graduated from the Coast Guard Academy in 1976 and is here today to be recognized. His citation reads as follows. Citation to accompany the award of the Distinguished Flying Cross to Lieutenant William W. Peterson, United States Coast Guard. Lieutenant Peterson is cited for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight on 30 July 1982 as Aircraft Commander of Coast Guard HH-52 Alpha 1425, engaged in the perilous rescue of 9 survivors from Coast Guard HC-130 1600. The HC-130 had crashed in bad weather while on a flight from Shemya Air Force Base to Coast Guard Loran Station, Attu Island, Alaska. Flying in extremely hazardous conditions with ceiling as low as 65 feet, visibility as low as 1/16 of a mile, and winds gusting up to 30 knots, Lieutenant Peterson flew his helicopter across 90 miles of open sea from U.S. Coast Guard cutter Mellon to Attu, where he began homing in on an ELT beacon. Inching the helo along the side of a mountain in thick fog, 40-knot winds, and turbulence, the crew located 4 survivors. Placing his co-pilot on the ground to aid the injured, Lieutenant Peterson performed a most demanding hoist and transported transported these survivors to the Loran station. Returning to the scene, Lieutenant Peterson was able to locate the crash site. In weather that was still deteriorating, he again sent his co-pilot out to aid the injured. He then flew to the Loran station, single-piloted, picked up 4 personnel, and returned to assist at the crash. Leaving his co-pilot at the crash site to direct the group parties arriving from the Loran station, Lieutenant Peterson and his air crewmen transported the remaining 5 survivors and then the original 4 to Shemya Air Force Base. Because of the heroic efforts and aeronautical skills of Lieutenant Peterson, all of the crash survivors were located and transported in a timely fashion. Lieutenant Peterson's courage, judgment, and unwavering devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. I now welcome Captain Peterson to the podium for some brief remarks.
So, good afternoon. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, Admiral, Corps, friends and family. I'd like to take just a couple minutes and I can discuss the rescue here that we did. And I would like to say, first off, that this rescue wasn't just my helicopter crew and that. It was a whole team of individuals, especially the Coast Guard Cutter Mellon, the Loran Station at Attu, and the Air Force personnel at Shemya. So this honor really should go to everyone. What you see above is a picture of the empennage, the tail section of the 1600 that is facing back down the hill. They crashed at about 450 foot up the side of the mountain in some bad weather. They were trying to get in for a logistics flight, the 3rd day of their logistics flight from Shemya to Attu when they crashed. The aircraft came apart due to the G-forces and torsional forces on it. The cockpit itself, with the 5 crew in the cockpit, pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, navigator, and radioman, careened up the side of the mountain and fully rotated several times as it went 600 feet up the 40 to 60 degree slope of that mountain after they hit. The other crew in the aft cabin area that broke apart were able to survive. There were 2 deaths. One was a scanner and the other was a seaman who was headed back to his post at Loran Station Attu. When you think about Alaska and we talk about distances and that, and you can look at this little chart here and see one of the things that people don't understand is Kodiak, Alaska was over 1,200 nautical miles from Attu. Attu is the westernmost island on the chain. It's about the same distance from Attu as if you were flying from Miami, Florida to St. Paul, Minnesota. That's a little bit of a distance. And from Anchorage, Alaska, where Elmendorf Hospital, where we eventually were able to take the survivors, it's the same as a flight from Miami, Florida to Denver, Colorado. So just to put that into perspective for you. This is the island of Attu. For those of you who have not read the book, The 1,000-Mile War, I encourage you to read it. This was the second bloodiest battle in World War II in the Pacific that was fought on American soil. And most people don't know anything about the fact that a battle was fought there, and we had over 3,500 wounded and dead U.S. soldiers, and over 2,800 Japanese soldiers perished on the island. When we took back Attu, which had been claimed by the Japanese, we put a Lorient station there. Lorient stations, the long-range aid to the navigation, was classified secret. Nobody knew that we had put the station there, and it was used for not only maritime navigation, but for air navigation during the war. After the war, the Coast Guard continued to run the Lorient station at Attu at several different locations, the final location being at Casco Cove, where the Lorient Sea Station was, which is where this air crew was trying to bring logistics. The Lorient Station was decommissioned because of GPS in 2010, so now nobody lives on the island of Attu. This is a picture I took about 2 days later after the rescue of the Mellon in Temec Bay. That's the 378 out of Seattle. This is an overhead picture that was taken from the mishap board 3 weeks after the mishap. The weather was so bad at Attu, and we're talking July, not February or January, but the weather was so bad for 10 days, no C-130s or aircraft could even get in there for the mishap to start it. But you can sort of see how that aircraft had impacted and worked its way up the side of the mountain. This is a picture that was taken about 2 hours after I had conducted the rescue. During the rescue itself, I never could see the tail section or anything. I was basically looking from here to the front 2 rows and could not see anything in front of me. And this is my crew at Air Station Kodiak in December. This is my AVDET team. In those days, you were allowed to have beards. Petty Officer Hisson is on the left. Petty Officer Jordan, Petty Officer Hassinger, and then Lieutenant Wallace, who was my co-pilot, and myself. My SAR crewman, Petty Officer Smith, had already transferred and was not there for the award ceremony. But that was my team for that object and for that deployment. I'm not sure how long anybody else is going to talk. So what I have experienced in my 4 years here from 1972 to 1976, and I was a 1976 graduate, be the best that you can be in whatever walk of life or whatever job that you take, especially in the Coast Guard. And what that means to me is to be a professional, to know what you have to do, to be a great teammate, because it takes a team. Not anybody out here alone can do what you have to do sometimes with these unique challenges. And have an exceptional work ethic. And what I mean there is practice, practice, practice. If you have to do maneuvers on a ship, if you need to be the best damage control team, firefighting team, air crew, on a patrol boat, you need to practice those maneuvers and those things so that you can, when that unique challenge comes before you, perform it and perform it to the best of your abilities. There are a lot of folks out there that are God-gifted with many talents, and all I ask is that you take those talents and you take them to the next level by continuing to practice and to work harder. Know your job and know what you're asking of the people that are with you. One of the things that was evident in this rescue was on the Coast Guard cutter Mellon. They transited for 6 hours on gas turbines, turning for 27 knots, making 23 because they had 14-foot seas and 20-knot headwinds. But they were transiting in uncharted waters. They were transiting in waters that there are no navigational aids. There are hundreds of shoals and shoal waters and water there that during the war, during the Operation Land Crab, to take back Attu, the Navy started out with 93 landing craft. At the end of 20 days, and when the effort was done on Attu, they had 3 landing craft left. 3 out of 93. And that was because of the environment and the shoal waters and that. And the Mellon transited there safely and was 6 nautical miles off of Krasny Point when I was out of fuel and I needed someplace to go to land and refuel. That team on the Mellon, in the H-52, it's only gravity refueled. So I had to land, get tied down, shut down the engine, stick the hose like you do at the gas station in, fuel me up with 600 pounds of fuel, restart the engine, take off the tie downs, and take off. It normally would take 45 minutes to an hour to conduct that. Friends, we did it in 9 minutes. 9 minutes is all it took for them to refuel me and for me to be back airborne and en route to Shimea. Never before I've ever been on a cutter, and I worked 4 years in the ship Helo division, did I ever see one that ever worked that efficiently and effective. So, know your job. Hold yourself accountable. Walk the walk. The Admiral and the Captain here have your back. You have theirs. Know what your job is and know what you're asking of your subordinates so that you can be a better leader. And then stay positive when the challenges seem insurmountable. I mean, there were several times that we were on the side of that mountain and the citation doesn't cover anywhere near half of what happened up there. Just know that you can do it if you don't give up. Keep a positive attitude. And then my next one is, and it might seem odd, but I lived by it as a SEAL at 2 air stations and groups. Safety first, mission second. Assess and reassess your risk as the mission evolves. It happens every time. I've launched on several hundred STAR cases, and every aviator in here will tell you the same thing. What you were told when you launched is not what you're going to see when you get on scene. I think they're nodding their head in the front row here. That is truly what you have to do when you're out there on your own, because your captain, your ops boss, the other people that you look up to, they're not going to be there with you when you're flying that mission. But they expect you to continue to reassess and to assess and make determinations. And because of that, for your crew and for those that you're trying to rescue, you'll be much safer. And then the last one might seem very odd, because I was operational for, I hate to say it, about 24 years in my 30 years in the Coast Guard. What have you done for the field today is from one of my mentors, who's here, Phil Volk, in that you're going to end up in a staff tour sometime, and you should. But that's what that staff tour is about. When you get there, and hopefully you'll remember these words, what have you done for the field today? Because what you're doing, whether you're up on the hill with Congress, or you're in there trying to figure out if that flight deck is right, or if that cutter is going to work, or that piece of radar or gear is going to work, that you do the best job that you can because everybody else out there is counting on you. Everybody in the field is counting on you to do the best that you can do so that they can have the best equipment and the best ability to do their job. So the last thing I'll end my comments is I'd like each of you to look down your row at the cadets that are with you on that row. Look to the left, look to the right. Because somebody in that row is going to be asked, just like I was, to do my job and for my crew to do their job. And are you going to be ready and be able to accept that challenge? Because somebody in your row, I guarantee you, if you stay, and in deference to the Admiral, I call it a calling, to be in the Coast Guard for 30 years, that if you have that calling and you are there, somebody in that row, somebody that you just looked at, is going to be asked to be what some people call a hero, but to do your job and to rescue and save people, and to do it to the best of your ability is all you can ask. So I thank you, and I know I can't take questions right now because we've got others, but afterwards, if anybody has any questions. And the other thing I'm not a very good marketer, but I did write a book about the rescue. I have donated 2 of the books to the library. It just got printed, and they're there. It's called A Miracle at A2, The Rescue of CG 1600. And you'll get a lot more out of it than you did out of this talk, probably. But I thank you, and go Bears.
Our next hero is Captain Frank A. Erickson. Captain Erickson is a member of the Great Class of 1931. His citation is to accompany the award of the Air Medal. Captain Erickson is represented here today by Captain Joe Kimball. His citation reads as follows: For service as set forth in the following citation, the President of the United States takes pleasure in presenting the Air Medal to Captain Frank A. Erickson, United States Coast Guard. Captain Erickson is cited for his outstanding service and is recognized for his pioneering efforts as the father of military helicopters. In 1943, he became the very first Coast Guard helicopter pilot and instructor, Coast Guard Helicopter Pilot Number 1. He trained 102 helicopter pilots and 225 mechanics. Captain Erickson conducted the first life-saving flight of a helicopter when he expertly flew 2 cases of blood plasma through exceptionally treacherous weather, saving the lives of Navy crewmen after the explosion of the USS Turner off New York Harbor. Throughout 1944, Captain Erickson performed the very first helicopter hoist pickups of a man in the water on 14 August and a man in a life raft on 25 September. In 1945, he was personally recognized by King George VI as an honorary member of the Military Division of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. 2 years later, he was awarded the Air Medal for piloting the helicopter that rescued 18 survivors of a horrific Belgium airliner crash in Newfoundland. Due to this outstanding display of airmanship and determination, Captain Erickson was also commissioned as a Knight of the Order of Leopold in Brussels. He went on to become the chief of the Research and Development Center, as well as an advisor for projects such as Flight Path Stabilizer, the NASA Gemini spacecraft hoist system, and the flight deck of the 210-foot Reliance Class cutter. Captain Erickson's outstanding courage, exceptional knowledge, and unwavering devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Coast Guard. I now welcome Captain Kimball to the podium for some brief remarks.
Good afternoon, Admiral Rendon, distinguished guests, Corps cadets. Kind of a surreal feeling for me to be right here before you. It's the 100th year of Coast Guard Aviation, and I'm in probably one of the coolest jobs in the world. And it's only by providence that I'm here. There's so many things, so many people that have gone before us, and Frank Erickson is one of those people. And to be able to be here and represent him is an overwhelming thing for me. I was an instructor in Mobile for about 5 years, in the age 65. I went back between 2008 and 2011 as the executive officer. And if you're an aviator, if you're in the Coast Guard and you're the aviator, everybody goes to Mobile once a year. You go there to fly your simulators, to get your proficiency training, and those simulators are contained in Erickson Hall. And there's a big picture of Frank Erickson, his logbooks on the wall. There is not a Coast Guard aviator that doesn't know who he is, which is why it's such a surreal event for me today. In fact, his Academy Class ring from 31 was lost. And the Coast Guard Aviation Association, the Pterodactyls, they found it on eBay. And they raised some funds and were able to buy it and work with the family, so they got it back. But they recovered this historical, artifact. And I was there during a lot of it, but I had left before the ring actually arrived, and I was back 1 year giving a presentation, and the XO that came after me walked in the room, and he said, "Hey, check this out." And he tossed something my way, and I caught it. I go, "What's this?" He goes, "Just put it on." So I put it on. I go, "What is it?" He goes, "It's Frank Erickson's ring." And I'm holding this thing like, dude, you shouldn't have thrown that. Like I'm holding it like porcelain, looking at it saying, I'm not worthy to do this. Like, it is an unbelievable, unbelievable thing. The vision and the tenacity, because helicopters, they didn't want to be used. There was no interest in DOD and the Coast Guard to use these newfangled things. And he just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and convincing people, we can use it to look at the air for submarines, to protect the fleet. We can use it for this, we can use it for that. Just this innovative tenacity is unbelievable. So, just a really unbelievable experience. So, one of the other events in the Centennial Coast Guard Aviation we did this year up in Grand Haven, there's a Coast Guard Festival in Grand Haven every year. Big Coast Guard town. I've never seen anything like it. They are all Coast Guard all the time, and it's a big deal. If you ever get a chance to go to Grand Haven on August 4th, I highly recommend it. But I got to meet Frank Erickson's grandson, and his great-grandson is actually in the Coast Guard. He's at EM school right now. He was on the Coast Guard Cutter Confidence. And during some of the Centennial events, I reached out to the CO. I said, I don't know if you know it or not, but you've got a non-rate on board that's kind of a celebrity. And I was on the cutter Diligence when I was in Cocoa Beach, and then we crossed deck to the Vigilant. So I was first lieutenant there. I kind of remember what it's like to be a member of Deck Force, and so I said, I think the last thing he would want the BMC to know is that he's, related to a famous Airedale. But we reached out to him, we talked to him, and it was it's amazing to get the stories of these folks. And so I reached out to Scott Kaufman, his grandson, and I said, can you tell me a few words? Tell me some stories from his perspective or from your perspective of who your grandfather was. And he said, I was very fortunate to have been around my grandfather as a teenager in my home in Texas some 40 years ago. He shared many great stories about his time in the Coast Guard and the wonderful people he worked with. He was very, very passionate about the Coast Guard. And I remember many times he'd said what he admired most about the Coast Guard was that it was a humanitarian force. It was a force that saved many lives, and he derived great personal satisfaction of being part of that great organization. He was privileged to have been on the ground floor of helicopter aviation, and it was a thrill to work with Igor Sikorsky as they started putting together these tools, these rescue tools. He saw the value of the helicopter and had spent several years flying seaplanes attached to Coast Guard cutters and air stations. He remembered how dangerous it was to land on water in unpredictable seas. And in the early years, there was a number of aircraft that actually wrecked as a result of that. He said, my grandfather was on duty in Pearl Harbor. He was coming off duty on that morning. And when the attack started, he ran back up to the control tower, and they were trying to get as many aircraft off the ground. I'm sitting there, my jaws just dropped. Like, are you kidding me? He's got a lot of great stories. And to be there and hear it from this person was an unbelievable, unbelievable honor. He said also, based on my feeble memory, he talked about the challenge of selling the merits of helicopter to the military. What greatly helped his efforts were the using of for anti-submarine warfare, which was further developed by Stuart Graham, Coast Guard helicopter pilot number 2. And in addition to flying convoys, he actually flew over to Korea and helped the MASH helicopters, how they were going to use the helicopter as a tool to rescue wounded Americans. He also says back in the day he was one heck of a ping pong player. He said he'd never let me win, but as in time, the Coast Guard aviators played a lot of ping pong in the hangar during their downtimes, and he was one of the best. So the rest you can see of what he did is an award citation, but you know, in the past couple of years, I've probably done presided over about 30, 35 retirement ceremonies, and my favorite part is at the very end, when you hand out this Coast Guard retirement pin. And the words that I use go something like this. Thanks for your 20, 25, or 30 years of service. Coast Guard gives you this 35-cent piece of plastic. And then I look at either their spouse or their sons and daughters or their parents, and I said, make sure that they wear this with pride, because every single person that trains another pilot, every single mechanic that teaches another mechanic, that does the maintenance on the aircraft, that gets people home, are responsible for a long, long lineage of lives saved and brought home safely. And so to be here for this very thing, where this isn't like a long lineage, this is the start of the lineage. This is the start of Coast Guard helicopter rescues. And that pin starts here. And it's just an unbelievable honor to be here, and I'm glad you guys have these events celebrating these heroes. And Admiral, thank you very much for the opportunity.
He is represented today by his daughter, Mrs. Liz Tierman. His plaque reads, Citation to accompany the award of the Distinguished Flying Cross to Commander Donald B. McDermott, United States Coast Guard. Commander McDermott is cited for heroism and extraordinary achievement in aerial flight as pilot and co-pilot of a PBM-type plane while carrying out conclusive experiments concerning open-sea seaplane operations off the coast of California throughout 1945. Participating in 45 open-sea landings and takeoffs in all forms of weather, Commander McDermott successfully brought his plane to base each time, sustaining only minor damages. Each trial performed proved both exceptional skill and an unwavering dedication to creating a safer, more capable service. Making scientific observations throughout his experiences, he compiled elusive and comprehensible instruction, serving as the first authoritative information concerning landings and takeoffs of airplanes at sea. His work has been an invaluable source of information and guidance for airmen of all services. Outstanding skill and devotion to duty in the carrying out of his hazardous work reflect the highest credit upon Commander McDermott and the United States Naval Service. I would like to invite Mrs. Tierman to the podium for some brief remarks on her father.
And this will be brief. First of all, thank you for this honor to our father, Donald B. McDermott. I am here with my brother Hugh, and we are both here to accept this award on behalf of our family. Our dad would be 110 if he was alive now, and he's no longer with us, obviously. But I know he looks down with great pride to know that his bravery and his persistence is being acknowledged today, so thank you. He loved flying, he loved the Coast Guard, he loved his airplanes, and he was old school. He was the seaplane advocate. My father was a real character. He is kind of notorious for some of the things he did over the years, and some of you may know them. I'm not going to go into that now. But he was affectionately known as Mac, or Captain Mac, or in our family, Captain Mac, Daddy dear, Sir. Living with Captain Mac was never boring. He had a great sense of humor, he had a twinkle in his eye, and he always had his cigar in his mouth. Some loved him, some felt a little less warm to him, but no one denied his bravery. He dared to follow his passion in spite of political consequences. He expected his family, his crews, and his friends to match his level of honesty, bravery, and commitment. That passion drove him to be the most incredible pilot. We are here today to acknowledge and honor that passion. To all you cadets, on behalf of our father, I wish you bravery, honesty, and the drive to fulfill your passions. Thank you.
Our final hero to be recognized is Rear Admiral Chester A. Richmond. He graduated from the Coast Guard Academy in the great class of 1941. Today, he will be represented by his oldest son, Mr. Robert Richmond. His citation reads as follows. The President of the United States takes pleasure in presenting the Distinguished Flying Cross to Commander Chester A. Richmond, United States Coast Guard, for service as set forth in the following citation. For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight on 12 and 13 April 1961 as pilot of HUL-1G CGNR 1338, engaged in delivery of a doctor and emergency medical supplies to St. George Island, Alaska, and subsequent air evacuation of 2 critically burned persons. Commander Richmond had departed the Coast Guard Air Detachment Kodiak, Alaska as aircraft commander of UF-2G CGNR 7228 to accomplish the mission. However, surrounding ice conditions precluded a water landing, and he proceeded to St. Paul Island to await the arrival of HUL-1G CGNR 1338, which he had ordered for use as an alternate means of rescue. When the helicopter was readied, despite hazardous weather conditions and completely disregarding his own safety, Commander Richmond immediately departed for St. George with a doctor and emergency supplies on board. The ensuing 43-mile overwater flight was accomplished in total darkness and a landing executed at the village ball field illuminated only by headlights of 2 trucks. The doctor and medical supplies were rushed to the aid of the critically burned persons, and emergency treatment was administered throughout the night. At daybreak, Commander Richmond successfully evacuated the doctor and patients to St. Paul Island, where they could be further transported to a hospital. Commander Richmond's expert airmanship, dauntless valor, sound judgment, and devotion to duty reflect the highest credit upon himself and the United States Coast Guard. I welcome Mr. Richmond to the podium for his brief remarks on his father.
Let me pull out my brief remarks. I'm Bob Richmond. I'm the oldest son of Chet Richmond. And when my dad won this Distinguished Flying Cross, he was in his late 40s. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. I'm 73 years of age. My dad died 4 years ago at age 95. And I'm going to talk a little bit about his aviation career, but at the time he died, he was the ancient Albatross, which is the oldest living Coast Guard aviator. And he maintained that role for about 20 years, and finally at 95 he had to give it up. Pass it on to somebody else. This is a tremendous honor, and what I'm going to say, everything I'm going to say has been vetted by my mother. I sent her an email of what I was going to say about Dad. She came back with a number of criticisms, a number of additions, a number of things that she thought should be mentioned. But what she did say is she wanted all of you cadets to know, the Admiral to know, and Cadet Mills to know that she was a New London, Connecticut girl. And in those days, with Captain MacDiarmid and the others that went to the academy, they all married girls from New London, Connecticut. My mother wanted you to know that she's not from Conn College, however. She's from Admiral, what time is dinner? No, seriously. In talking to Lieutenant Burke and in Cadet Brumbaugh about what might be of interest to cadets, they said two things. It might be interesting to know a little bit about your dad's life at the academy and before the academy. How did he get here? And then maybe a little bit about what I thought were his leadership qualities. And so I'm going to try to talk about that, but most of it I have to get from the academy yearbook or from what my mother told me. I do know that my dad went to sea as a 14-year-old boy because his father was a captain of a mobile oil tanker. So every summer he went around different places, sailed up the Yangtze River as a 14-year-old. He eventually enlisted in the Army. And after 2 years in the Army, a friend of his said he was going to take the Coast Guard Academy exam, and would you like to take the exam with me? And my dad took the Coast Guard Academy exam and passed the exam. In those days, in his class, in the graduating class, there was 22 men. But in the class that came in, I assume there was a larger number. He was the last person admitted to his class because of his English grammar scores. His math scores were pretty good. He graduated with honors from the Coast Guard Academy. He was the regimental, you didn't have regiments, you have a regiment today. He was the battalion commander, #1 cadet in his class, and he was captain of the basketball team. So I think he did fairly well as an academy cadet. He then was shipped off in 1941 when he graduated. First he was on the cutter Bib, and I see Bib Street here. I don't think the Bib is much of a cutter, incidentally. So he went from the Bib to the Hunter Liggett to the Ingham in the North Atlantic. He was picked for Naval Aviation School, Coast Guard Naval Aviation School in Pensacola, Florida. Apparently my dad, who came from a seagoing family, always wanted to be a pilot because he saw Charles Lindbergh fly as a boy coming into San Francisco. My dad went to Pensacola and became Coast Guard Aviator number 145. He's helicopter pilot number 146. I won't bore you with the details of his aviation career other than to say that he served in a number of billets, and certainly the captain here probably has heard of my dad. My dad had a much different career than Captain MacDiarmid, I might add. And my dad served under Captain MacDiarmid a number of times. My mother had a deathly fear of Captain MacDiarmid, I might add. She described that to me last night when I was having dinner with Liz and Hugh. But in any case, my dad served in a number of Coast Guard billets. He finally ended up at Navy Test Pilot School. In those days, the Coast Guard wanted to see how their pilots would stack up against naval aviators. And so my dad was picked to go to Naval Test Pilot School at Patuxent River, Maryland. He ended up #2 in his class as a naval test pilot. He went from flying Grumman Albatrosses to helicopters to C-123s to flying a Navy Panther jet. As a Coast Guard aviator, and if this sounds like a bragging, I can do that because I have a fear of flying myself. I wouldn't fly in an aircraft if I didn't have to fly commercially. He graduated #2 in his class at Navy Test Pilot School. The Navy asked him to stay as a Coast Guard aviator as a Navy test pilot for a year, which he did. He eventually worked his way to Kodiak, where he got this particular medal. He went to Kodiak with 7 children and my mother. He came home from Washington, D.C., where he had a headquarters duty as head of Coast Guard Aviation. In those days, it was a captain's job. And said, "Barbara, we're moving to Kodiak, Alaska." And my mom said, "No, Chester, you're moving to Kodiak." And the other thing, if you look at my dad's yearbook, the name Chester was not a name that he allowed. Nobody that knows my dad, his age, his name is Pat. He hated to be called Little Chetty. His mother called him Little Chetty, and so when he got to the academy, he changed him to Pat. You look at his academy, when you think of the academy, you'll see it's Pat Richmond. He gets to Kodiak, he gets this award. One of the things that Cadet Brumbaugh asked me to speak about in Lieutenant Burke was one of my dad's leadership qualities, and so to segue quickly into that. I'm sure he was a wonderful aviator. I don't have any doubt about that. But one thing about my dad's career, both as a Coast Guard officer and as an aviator, I never heard him come home and talk about anything. I never knew about this rescue. Knew nothing about it. He didn't talk about those kind of things. He just did it. The captain said, what do? You walk the walk? My dad walked the walk. Is that a leadership quality? It probably is. Can you emulate that leadership quality? I'm sure most of you can. When I sent the email to my mother, I said, you know, the thing I think my dad was the best quality he had, he was extremely humble. He never bragged. He never, berated people. He was respected by all of them, particularly by the enlisted men. And so I said, hey, Mom, Dad, very, very humble. And she said, Bob, you're crazy. I've never seen anybody so self-confident. He thought he could do any rescue, any job, anything. And I said, Mom, that doesn't mean you're not humble. That just means you're not a bragger, like maybe your oldest son, the lawyer, That's what it means. If you are humble, you don't have to tell people about it, you just do it. So when my dad died at age 95, obviously people that served with him, weren't still alive. The guy was the ancient albatross. There wasn't anybody else around his age. He was the last person alive in the last 40 months. But the thing that struck me the most, and if you talk about leadership, I know each one of you can take this with you, was the way he treated the men. And I would get these emails, after his death, we were going to do the eulogy, about Admiral Richmond this, Admiral Richmond that. In every single circumstance, it was how he treated people with respect, how he listened to his men, how he acted upon their ideas, and how he gave them credit for their ideas. And so I would say to you, if that's a leadership quality that you can take with you, patterning yourself after my dad or any of these other people's, that's something that I think would be very important. In any case, thank you very much. I wish I knew more about my dad's career as a pilot. He was the head of the Kodiak Air Station. I know he had a lot of missions. I see him on, my mother watches Coast Guard Alaska. I don't know if you watch that show. And the missions that he did in a single engine helicopter, without a dry suit, without, two jet engines, out in the middle of the Bering Sea, I don't know why he would do that with 7 kids, But in any case, I want to thank you very much for the honor, Admiral. Thank you very much. He was a good-looking guy, wasn't he?
States Coast Guard Academy Glee Club, who will be performing the Armed Forces Medley. audience please remain standing for the singing of our alma mater?